going to have an interview with my friend and colleague, attorney Jeffery Robinson, executive director of the new Who We Are Project, former deputy legal director and director of the ACLU Trone Center for Justice. Jeffery has opened up some caskets, y'all, and he has just produced a slam dunk must-see documentary about race and justice in the United States. We're going to first view a very brief trailer to the documentary and then go right into our interview before we proceed with the rest of the Justice Roundtable Assembly. So let's have that trailer for the Who We Are documentary.
If you have ever owned a slave, please raise your hand. Slavery is not our fault. We didn't do it. We didn't cause it, but it is our shared history.
Slavery had nothing to do with the war.
And so if I make the statement to you, America was founded on white supremacy.
Lynchings or hangings took place here.
It's a genocide, it's an ethnic cleansing.
The bodies were dumped all the way where the underpass is, and they intentionally put the interstate on top of their bodies.
It's ingrained in my memory. I'm just looking at him in the ditch with his eyes open.
My daddy sat on the carport right here in a lawn chair with a shotgun across his lap because he was going to be ready if somebody came to the house.
There must be a revolution of values in our country.
I cannot look at that video in its entirety.
And my brother did not deserve to die unarmed with his hands in the air.
It will never get easier to have an honest discussion about race in America than it is right now, because if we wait, it is only going to get harder.
Greetings, Jeffery Robinson. I am just so thrilled that you are here with me today discussing this phenomenal project that you are the CEO and the subject/star, shall we say, of the Who We Are Project. But you know, I know you from the ACLU when you were the director of the Racial Justice Project there, and just kind of been following you. Tell me, what is this film? This film that has been described as, let me just get it right. It's been described as a documentary that is part TED Talk, part cinema, part expose, and a 100% reckoning. Tell us just what this is, how you happen to do it, and just what we can expect. Go on, rock and roll.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having this chat with me. The film is called Who We Are, a Chronicle of Racism in America. And it was born out of work I started doing back in 2011. As the film explained, my wife's younger sister lived in Queens, New York. She was a single mother raising her son with her mother. And my wife's sister passed away, and then her mother passed away, all within several months. And so Matthew, our 13-year-old nephew, became our 13-year-old son. And he moved from Queens, New York to Seattle, Washington to live with us. And my wife and I didn't have kids. So all of a sudden, there's a young Black man in my home. And all of the issues of race that I had been dealing with as a criminal defense lawyer since 1981 became much, much more personal. And I was afraid because I had never raised a child before. And I started reading. I don't even know what I was looking for. But what I found were facts about our history that I had never been taught, facts that escaped me as a student at Marquette University and as a student at Harvard Law School. And I started to collect these facts and put them into a presentation. I was going around the country doing this presentation. And when I got hired at the ACLU as a deputy legal director in 2015, I continued to give this presentation. And in April of 2017, I was giving the presentation to lawyers and judges in federal court in Manhattan. And one of the lawyers in the room was a woman named Sarah Kunstler, daughter of the famous civil rights lawyer, William Kunstler. And Sarah and her sister, Emily, are also filmmakers. They called me 2 days after this presentation and said, this presentation is powerful. We think it should be a film. And I started laughing at them. And 1 year later, on Juneteenth, 2018, we were in Town Hall Theater, a Broadway theater in New York, in front of a packed audience. We filmed the presentation. And for the next 3 years, we traveled around the country with me giving my presentation in different cities and then meeting people whose lives had connected with the true narrative of anti-Black racism in America. And by filming those people and talking to them, we put it all together. Sarah and Emily are brilliant filmmakers, and that's how we came up with this film, Who We Are, A Chronicle of Racism in America.
Well, you know, Jeffrey, that is absolutely awesome. And I remember the first time I saw the presentation, it knocked me off my feet. I remember exactly where I was. I was in the Kennedy Center. Yeah, it was at the some type of event. I don't even remember what the event was, but you were like the luncheon speaker or something along those lines. I remember my colleague Jocelyn McCurdy said, "You got to hear Jeffery Robinson. You got to hear this speech. I mean, he is Nikichi. You are going to really like this, Nikichi." And she was absolutely right. I mean, I was just awestruck and dumbfounded because it wasn't about the facts, because I know a lot about Black history and all like that, but it was the manner in which you presented, the manner in which you put all of the different elements together, the manner in which you went step by step, point by point, making sure that all strata of American life could understand and hear just what you were saying. And I know it started out with, well, at least the film, I saw the film started out with you having a conversation with a white supremacist. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, we went to Charleston, South Carolina to film because, as you know, the vast majority of Black Americans can trace their heritage to Charleston, South Carolina, in terms of where people came from the Middle Passage, because Charleston was a major port in the southern part of the country. So it was one of the biggest ports and one of the first places where a ship would land. So we went to Charleston and we were very, very interested in what was happening in Charleston. And activists told us that there were white supremacists that demonstrated on the waterfront every weekend. And I, quite frankly, was sick. I had gotten sick while we were there. It was a Sunday and I was in the hotel in bed. And Sarah and Emily called me up and said, "We've got this guy down here who's willing to talk. He's signed a release. You've got to come down here." So I pulled myself out of bed and I went down and had a conversation with this man. And many people have asked me, weren't you angry or weren't you agitated by what he was saying? And of course I was. But I've been trained as a criminal defense lawyer. And I used that training, which taught me, if you are challenging what somebody is saying and you yell and scream and get emotional, then it breaks down into a fight. But if you can stay calm, then the other person has to stay calm. And if you put facts in front of the person that they have to agree with, then you'll get to a place in the conversation where you may not get. I think this man was waiting for me to start screaming at him and calling him a racist. He talked about moral, MORRIL, taxes that the North was imposing on the South. I think when he says that to many people, they have no idea what those taxes were, but I did. And so I told him, yeah, I know what those taxes were on cotton, tobacco, and rice. And he's saying, well, yeah. And we talked about how they were produced. And he had to admit that it was at least 95% by the labor of enslaved people. And so I was simply talking to him and trying to put before him facts that I knew he would have to agree with. And I think if you watch the film, you'll see that by the end of the conversation, he's on a bit of shaky ground because he didn't want to talk about how many enslaved people were responsible for all those crops and all that money. He didn't want to talk about that. And so he tried to change the topic. And he said, well, they were treated like family. And that's a myth. It's part of the lost cause narrative. It's part of, well, slavery wasn't that bad because the South the Southern people were kind and gentle to enslaved people. That's just not the truth. And I was able to, as opposed to screaming at him, rely on my training as a lawyer. He just said something that makes no sense whatsoever. So what can I say to him to demonstrate that? And what I came up with was, well, then it would be okay if I own you, as long as I treat you like family. And he couldn't acknowledge that. He said, do you mean in today's world? And my response was, in any world. And then he said, do you mean in today's time? And my response was, in any time. Because he was looking for a place to make an exception, and I wasn't going to give it to him. And he finally said, no, I wouldn't be satisfied with that. Yes, I do have to admit slavery is evil, but this Confederate flag has nothing to do with it. And that's where we ended the conversation. And I will tell you, I shook his hand. And there were times when I talked to the directors about taking that out of the film. Because remember, a lot of the film, all of the town hall portion, and a lot of the interviews we did, this is like 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago. And there's so much that has happened since 2018. But I shook his hand because that's what you're supposed to do when you're having a conversation with another human being, and then you're separating, and the conversation has been civil. And so I shook his hand, and I hope that what people get from that is that there can be conversations on the issue of race where you don't give an inch. Absolutely. In terms of what you know and believe to be true, but you can put something into somebody else's mind by trying to talk to them as opposed to screaming at them. I'm not saying I changed this man's opinion on anything, but I made him think. And I'll tell you what else, the camera didn't show it, but there were a lot of people standing around listening. Yes. And they, I guarantee you, had not heard that kind of conversation in front of that Confederate monument before. And so those people had to go home and think, what do I make of that? And it's those moments when people are saying, I didn't know those things. What do I make of that? Those are the moments when you can get somebody to do something or to think about something that they've never done before.
And you know, Jeffrey, the beauty of all of this is just as those people were standing around and nodding, I never thought of it that way before. Now with this film that will be hitting the big screen, I think in January or February, you'll let us know about that in just a moment. So many more people will have the opportunity to also say, I never thought of this before. And you know, you're here. We're in front of the audience of the Justice Roundtable, which deals with justice system reform and transformation. Okay, and I know throughout the film, you know, you talk about the slave patrols and that was the predecessor to the police today, and you talked about the cases, some of the cases of Eric Garner and Terrence Crutcher, and we talked about the war on drugs with John Ehrlichman, and just how that all came about with the Nixon administration, the Clinton-Klein bill, and mass incarceration, and all these things. Just touch on a couple of those that you might want to share with the Justice Roundtable to just dig just a little bit deeper on any of those areas, or all of them, just very briefly connected together.
Well, I think that one of the most important concepts in this film, and one of the most important concepts of the Who We Are project, the organization that I've now launched, is found in the words of George Orwell in his infamous book, 1984, who controls the past, controls the future. And so if you look at prisons today, and you say Black Americans make up about 13% of the population, but just over 40% of the prison population. So either we are more criminal, more willing to break the law, less willing to live peacefully with each other, or something else is going on. And it's that something else is going on issue that is lost in history. And so understanding that the purpose of the laws passed by colonial America and by constitutional America up until the Civil War were to keep Black people in the condition of being enslaved. That meant that when we ran away, someone would go and catch us and bring us back. If we talked back to a master, we would be physically punished. These were things that were seen as normal and natural. And when the South lost the Civil War, do you really think that in 1865, when the South conceded and surrendered, that all of those white supremacist ideas just went away? They didn't go away. They stayed right where they were. And so the South, in particular, started criminalizing Black life with Black codes, with Jim Crow laws, with putting Black people in jail around the time that elections were held. Because if you're in jail, you can't vote. And then the states decided, well, we can come up with something called felony disenfranchisement laws. And if you look at the history, you will see that right after the Civil War, states with large Black populations started passing disenfranchisement laws so that people couldn't vote if they were convicted of a crime. And in states like Maine, where they had small Black populations, they were getting rid of those laws or they never passed them in the first place. And so this was an attempt to use the criminal justice system to disenfranchise Black voters, because we might be not slaves anymore, but if you can't vote, then you are weakened in terms of your ability to participate in the political process in this country. And so police departments were developed, especially in the South, out of slave patrols. And there is a huge amount of historical writing about this. Why is that important? Because the job of the police from colonial America through constitutional America has always involved the control and suppression of Black communities. Article 4 in the Constitution made it clear if a Black person who is enslaved escapes, they have to be returned on demand. That means literally Black attempts at freedom in the United States were unconstitutional until 1865. They were literally unconstitutional. So police departments that were born out of slave patrols and that were born to regulate and suppress Black communities took Jim Crow laws, Black codes, and other things and continued to do that. People say we have all these problems with policing, but Nikichi, go back 102 years to 1919. The Chicago quote unquote riots where a young Black man is killed in Lake Michigan because his raft floated to the white side of the lake and the white people threw rocks at him, knocked him off his raft, and he drowned. There was an uprising. And after it ended, there was a commission and they wrote a report. 1932 in Harlem, another uprising. There was a commission and they wrote a report. 1967 in Detroit, there was another uprising. There was a commission and they wrote a report. 1992, after the Rodney King incident, there was an uprising and there was a commission and they wrote another report. And if you put all four reports side by side, they are saying exactly the same thing. There is racism in policing. It is rampant. There are two justice systems, one for white people and one for Black people. They're all saying the same thing. So when we look at the issues around policing and the criminal legal system today, it is important to understand that history. Because if you don't understand that history, then you may be saying, well, let's pass a law saying that the police can't kneel on someone's neck. That will solve the George Floyd problem. And as you and I know, that won't move an inch towards solving the George Floyd problem. The problem is not kneeling on someone's neck. The problem is that police, in that instance, in front of video cameras, took 9 minutes to choke out somebody's life, whether they were kneeling on his neck or had an arm around his neck or put the car tire on his neck. How they did it is not the point. That they did it is the point. And so when we look at reforming policing, we have to look at the history of policing to understand how we got to where we are. And that's what we have never done in this country at any significant level. That's why you have $10 million that the Obama administration put into the Minneapolis Police Department to give them de-escalation training and other things. And this was before George Floyd was killed. So understanding the history in this country, understanding how police departments were formed, understanding what jobs they were given when it came to the Black community, understanding the narrative that all of us are criminal and dangerous. If you don't understand that, then when you're trying to reform policing today, you're going to come up with solutions that are just ice cream and cake frosting, and they're not going to do anything to change the real problem.
So let me just ask you this, Jeffrey, because we happen to be having this conversation. This conversation is being recorded for Justice Roundtable, but we happen to be having it today on the very day that Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted of all charges. I'm just curious, you talked about there was a system for Blacks and a system for whites. Do you have any just off the cuff, we didn't talk about this in advance, but any off the cuff, very brief commentary with respect to that? Because it kind of is like smack in your face. I mean, I don't know, just curious, what are your thoughts?
I was expecting this verdict from the behavior of the judge. And but my gut was ripped out this morning when I read it. And I can't say I'm surprised, because I'm not. I am heartbroken. I am physically ill. If a young Black man had been carrying an AR-15 on the streets of Kenosha that night, he would be dead.
Absolutely.
We wouldn't have had any kind of a trial. And this is simply an indication of how far the criminal legal system will go to protect those who are in the majority. In the majority, and when I say majority, I mean controlling majority. White America. Kyle Rittenhouse is set free. A young white man the other day who was convicted of 4 sexual assaults of high school girls was given no jail. Now, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I think that there are very, 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 very few people that need to be in jail or prison in America. But what keeps being demonstrated is that the criminal legal system can find a way to see humanity in a criminal defendant as long as that person is white. Right. Then they can find the humanity. The kid Brock Turner out in Stanford who raped a young woman was not sent to prison. A judge saying prison won't do him any good, it'll just ruin his life. But when young Black men come in front of that judge, that narrative isn't there. You need to go to prison and get punished. And if it's going to ruin your life, well, your life was pretty much ruined already. So I'm not taking that much away from you. So there was a song I used to know from my youth, and one of the lyrics was, I used to be disgusted, now I try and be amused. Well, I'm not amused at all, and I am disgusted. But this is who we are in America, and this is what makes the work that the Who We Are Project is trying to do, the work that the Justice Roundtable is trying to do. This is what makes our work so critically important. We are at a tipping point in this country, a critical tipping point. We were there at the formation of constitutional America, because the colonies were awash in slavery, and we were forming the Constitution. We didn't have to continue it, but those folks got together, they looked at the money that was on the table from slavery, and they said, oh yeah, we are doubling down on this. And then 6 provisions, at least 6 in the Constitution, protect the institution of slavery. At the end of the Civil War, Reconstruction was working. There were 2,000 Black men who held elected office before the 15th Amendment was passed. Those enslaved people had been in the starting blocks, and when somebody said go, they took off because they were ready. And what happened then? In the election of 1876, the Northern troops were withdrawn from the South. The South started to reorganize Confederate soldiers into groups like the KKK, Black codes and Jim Crow laws. And once again, we rolled right back down.
That tipping point.
In the 1960s, in the Civil Rights Movement, I'm 11 years old when King gets assassinated. And to my young eyes, all I had seen up to that point was the bus boycotts. We were winning on buses. We were winning at lunch counters. We were desegregating schools. I thought we were headed toward a racial reckoning that would take us to a whole new place in this country. And then King got killed. And what came next was Richard Nixon and the war on drugs. That is 3 tipping points we have experienced as a nation, and each time we rolled back. A tipping point in a country that is 400 years old, it's not a second or a minute or a year. It's as long as a decade. We have been at this tipping point since 2016, and we are wavering back and forth over, is the ball going to roll back, or are we going to head in a different direction? So the work that the Justice Roundtable is doing right now is critical to the future of our country. If any of us have children or nieces or nephews, this is what this is about. What kind of world are they going to live in? And we are the ones who are going to decide which way the ball rolls this time.
So, as we're coming to a close, you're absolutely correct about these tipping points. And we're at a tipping point right now. And now your film, this phenomenal film, Who We Are, a Chronicle of Racism, I think it is, in America, is coming out at this precipitous time of a tipping point. Tell us when it's going to come out, how folk can plug in to it, how folk can see everything that I've seen, because I was able to see a preview, I mean, it's not just a story of facts and figures. It's a very human story also, and it's the human story told through your personal eyes, and it is extremely, extremely, extremely riveting. So tell folk about when,
thank you,
how, where, and all that.
So Sony Pictures Classics has purchased distribution rights to the film, both here in America and internationally. They are promoting the film for an Oscar, and who knows what will happen there, but they're doing great work. The film is going to premiere in America in Los Angeles and New York on January 14th, the Friday of Martin Luther King's birthday weekend. It is going to have a theatrical run throughout the country in major cities all over America with hopefully the pandemic won't stop that from happening. And it will go to streaming services later on in the fall or the winter of 2022. It's going to premiere January 14th, 2022. And then later that year, it will end up on Netflix. So people are going to have the opportunity to see it. It is called Who We Are, a Chronicle of Racism in America, not the Chronicle of Racism in America, because it is focused, Nikichi, on us, on Black Americans. And there are other stories of racism in this country that we could tell. If I was telling the Chronicle, this movie would be 8-9 hours long, and it would still only be a summary. I'm focusing on the experience of Black Americans. And I think what we can learn from that can be applied to all other kinds of issues that we have in this country. But I am very proud of this film. I do have some personal stories in this film. And what I would say is, many people have said to me, and I say in the film that my parents were unicorns for what they were able to do to give their children a better chance at having a successful life. What I want to make clear is I was not singling out my parents or me as anything special, because you know, and quite frankly, everybody on the Justice Roundtable knows that there were nothing but unicorn Black parents throughout American history who were always finding a way to make $1 out of 15 cents, a way to get their children into a better situation than they had been in. So while my parents are, near and dear to me, my story is what it is, and it is simply an example of the kind of things that Black Americans all over this country have been dealing with for centuries.
Well, thank you so very much, attorney and counselor at law, my brother, Jeffery Robinson, CEO of the Who We Are Project, writer and a producer and the subject, AKA star, of the upcoming film, Who We Are, a Chronicle of Racism in America. Thank you so very much for joining the Justice Roundtable.
Nikichi, thank you for having me, and please keep on doing what you're doing. We both got lots of work to do, so let's take care of ourselves over this holiday season, but then buck up and saddle up because we got a lot more coming.
All right. Who we are, peace and blessings.